Welcome to your storytelling. Enjoy the stories, and don't forget to subscribe. When my husband, Daniel, told me he got a job in another city, I was thrilled for him. It was a great opportunity, better pay, a leadership role, and a fresh start for his career. I remember the excitement in his eyes when he shared the news over dinner. "It's just 2 hours away," he said, squeezing my hand. "I'll be home every weekend." I believed him. The first few weeks went smoothly. We talked every night, shared jokes, and he sent me photos of his new office. But slowly, things shifted. His calls became brief, his texts delayed. "Just busy with work," he'd say. Then, one night, he forgot to call. I stared at my phone, waiting, my heart sinking. When I texted, he replied an hour later. "Sorry, long day. Fell asleep." It sounded reasonable, but something felt off. The doubt crept in quietly, like a shadow in the corner of my mind. And once it was there, it refused to leave. When my husband, Daniel, told me he got a job in another city, I was thrilled for him. It was a great opportunity, better pay, a leadership role, and a fresh start for his career. I remember the excitement in his eyes when he shared the news over dinner. "It's just 2 hours away," he said, squeezing my hand. "I'll be home every weekend." I believed him. The first few weeks went smoothly. We talked every night, shared jokes, and he sent me photos of his new office. But slowly, things shifted. His calls became brief, his texts delayed. "Just busy with work," he'd say. Then, one night, he forgot to call. I stared at my phone, waiting, my heart sinking. When I texted, he replied an hour later. "Sorry, long day. Fell asleep." It sounded reasonable, but something felt off. The doubt crept in quietly, like a shadow in the corner of my mind. And once it was there, it refused to leave. The following weekend, Daniel came home, acting like nothing had changed. But I noticed the difference. His hugs were shorter, his attention scattered. We used to talk about everything, but now there were silences filled with invisible tension. I brushed it off. Maybe he was just adjusting to the new job. But on Sunday, as he packed to leave, his phone buzzed. I wasn't snooping. It was right there on the table. A message lit up the screen. "Can't wait to see you again." My heart skipped. The sender's name was just an initial. I tried to sound casual. "Who's Jay?" He glanced at the screen, then at me, too quick. "Someone from work. We're working on a project." I nodded, pretending to believe him. But my chest felt tight, like I couldn't take a full breath. That night, I stared at the ceiling long after he left, wondering why my gut screamed louder than his words. After that weekend, the space between Daniel and me grew wider, though we never admitted it out loud. His calls were rushed, like an obligation he had to check off his list. I tried to convince myself I was overthinking, but doubt is like a splinter. You can't ignore it without feeling the sting. One evening, while scrolling through social media, I searched his profile. It was mostly the same, except for one thing. He'd started following someone new. Her name was Julia. I clicked on her profile. She was pretty, too pretty to ignore. My heart pounded as I scrolled. Pictures of her in the city where Daniel worked. Smiling, carefree. One post caught my attention. A photo of a coffee cup with the caption, "My favorite person knows how I like it." It was posted on a day Daniel had canceled our call, saying he was working late. I stared at the screen, my stomach sinking. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe Julia was just a friend, a colleague. But that didn't stop me from checking her profile every day, like picking at a scab that wouldn't heal. The next weekend, Daniel came home. I watched him closely. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and he flinched when I touched his phone by accident. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Do you know someone named Julia?" I asked casually. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Yeah, she's from work." "Why?" I shrugged back, pretending it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. His eyes darted away too quickly, and my heart knew what my mind refused to admit. That night, while he slept, I picked up his phone. My hands trembled as I entered his passcode. Still the same as always. There were messages. Dozens of them. "I miss you already. Last night was amazing. When can I see you again?" My heart shattered in the quiet darkness. The next morning, I didn't pretend. I didn't make coffee or ask about his plans. I sat at the kitchen table, his phone in front of me. "Who is she?" I asked, my voice steady, though my heart raced. Daniel froze, his face pale. "What are you talking about?" I held up his phone. "Julia." His mouth opened, but no words came out. The silence was deafening. Finally, he sighed. "It's not what you think." I laughed bitterly. "Isn't it?" He tried to explain. Said it was new, it didn't mean anything, he didn't plan for it to happen. But his words felt like dust, crumbling before they could reach me. I looked at the man I thought I knew and realized I didn't recognize him anymore. After Daniel's weak excuses, I just stared at him, numb. It didn't mean anything? Was that supposed to comfort me? I thought about every late night call he'd missed, every lie wrapped in a fake smile. "How long?" I asked quietly. His eyes dropped to the table. "A few months. A few months." So, while I was here, waiting for his calls, missing him, he was with her, laughing, holding her, sharing pieces of himself that used to be mine. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "I don't even know who you are." He reached for me, but I stepped back. "Don't." My heart felt like shattered glass, sharp and fragile. I wanted to scream, cry, break something, but I didn't. I just walked out. The cold air outside felt like freedom and heartbreak all at once. After that day, Daniel tried to call. I ignored every message. What was left to say? Sorry, couldn't glue the pieces back together. I spent my days moving through routines like a ghost. At work, I smiled when I had to. At home, I sat in silence, staring at nothing. The house felt too big without his presence, yet his memory clung to every corner. His coffee mug still in the sink, his jacket hanging by the door. One night, I finally listened to one of his voicemails. "Anna, please. I messed up. I don't even know why it happened. I miss you. I love you." Love? That word sounded foreign coming from him now. If this was love, it was hollow, like an echo fading in an empty room. Days turned into weeks. My friends noticed something was off, but I brushed them off with forced smiles. Then, one evening, my best friend, Lisa, showed up unannounced. She took one look at me, disheveled, eyes puffy from crying, and didn't ask questions. She just hugged me. The floodgates opened. I told her everything, from the distant calls to the texts from Julia. She listened without interrupting, her face a mix of sympathy and anger. "Do you want to fix this?" she asked gently. I didn't know. I thought I did. I thought I wanted the man I married. But now, I wasn't sure if he even existed. "How do you forgive someone who broke you?" I whispered. She didn't have an answer. Neither did I. Curiosity is a strange thing. Despite the pain, I needed to know more. Not about Julia, about Daniel. Who was he when he wasn't with me? I drove to his apartment in the city one weekend. I don't know what I expected. To catch him? To confront him again? His car was parked outside, but the lights were off. I waited, heart racing with every minute. Eventually, he came out. Not with Julia, but alone. He looked different. Tired, older, weighed down. I followed him, not out of malice, but because I wanted to understand. He went to a small cafe, sat alone, staring at his coffee like it held answers. In that moment, I realized something. He wasn't happy. Not with her. Not without me. But it didn't change the fact that he broke us. Back home, I couldn't shake the image of Daniel sitting alone. So I did the only thing I could. I wrote him a letter. I poured out everything I felt. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the emptiness he left behind. I wrote about the little things I missed, the way he used to laugh, the warmth in his eyes before they turned cold. But I also wrote about strength, how I was learning to stand without him, how his absence showed me I deserved more than broken promises. I didn't send it. I folded the letter, tucked it into a drawer, and realized it wasn't for him. It was for me. After writing the letter, I felt lighter, as if the weight had shifted from my heart to the pages. But Daniel didn't stop reaching out. His messages kept coming, apologies wrapped in desperation. "I miss you, Anna. Can we talk? Please, just give me one more chance." I read them but never replied. What was the point? Words were easy. Actions had already told me everything I needed to know. One night, he called again. I stared at the screen, his name glowing like a ghost from another life. I almost answered. Almost. But instead, I let it ring until it stopped. The silence afterward felt like victory. A few days later, I ran into Daniel's sister, Emily, at the grocery store. We hadn't spoken since everything happened. She hugged me tightly, her face filled with concern. Anna, what's going on? Daniel's been a mess. I swallowed hard. Ask your brother. She sighed, her eyes softening. He's not the same without you. He regrets everything. I didn't doubt that. Regret is easy when you lose something valuable. But regret doesn't erase betrayal. We chatted briefly, avoiding the elephant in the room. As I walked away, her words echoed in my mind. He's not the same without you. But I was no longer the same either. One morning, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Daniel stood there, looking exhausted and fragile, holding a small envelope. I just needed to give you this, he said softly. I didn't invite him in. I just took the envelope, nodded, and closed the door. Inside was a handwritten letter. His words were raw, filled with regret and admissions he'd never spoken aloud. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know it was never about you. I was lost, and I hurt the person I loved most because I didn't know how to face myself. I read it twice. Then I folded it neatly and put it away. It was too late for apologies. Weeks passed. The days grew warmer, and slowly, the ache inside me began to fade. It wasn't gone, but it didn't control me anymore. I redecorated the house, rearranged furniture, painted the bedroom a new color, something bright and fresh. It felt symbolic, like shedding old skin. One evening, as I sipped tea on the porch, I realized something profound. I had survived. Daniel's betrayal had shattered me, but piece by piece, I was rebuilding. Not the same as before, but stronger, wiser. Healing isn't a straight line. Some days hurt more than others. But every sunrise reminded me that life moves forward, even when hearts are broken. And so did I. Months later, I saw Daniel one last time. It was accidental, a random crossing at a cafe we both used to love. Our eyes met briefly. He looked surprised, maybe even hopeful, but I just smiled politely and kept walking. That smile wasn't for him. It was for me. Because in that moment, I realized I didn't feel anger anymore. No bitterness, no sadness. Just peace. Daniel had been a chapter in my life, but he wasn't the whole story. I was writing new pages now, ones filled with self-love, growth, and the quiet strength of survival. Sometimes, closure doesn't come with dramatic confrontations or perfect words. Sometimes, it's just a peaceful heart and the ability to walk away without looking back. Life settled into a new rhythm, one without Daniel's shadow lingering over me. At first, it felt strange, waking up without expecting his texts, not waiting for his calls. But with time, I found comfort in the quiet. I focused on myself, picking up hobbies I'd abandoned, painting, gardening, even yoga. I reconnected with friends I'd drifted from, laughed without forcing it, and discovered that solitude didn't mean loneliness. One evening, I stood in front of the mirror, really looking at myself. Not as Daniel's wife, not as someone broken by betrayal, just me. For the first time in months, I liked what I saw. Healing isn't loud. It's in the small moments, the quiet mornings, the peaceful nights, the simple act of choosing yourself. And I was finally choosing me. Despite the progress, grief has a way of sneaking up on you. One afternoon, I stumbled upon an old photo album tucked in the back of a drawer. Our wedding pictures stared back at me, smiling faces frozen in time, filled with promises we never kept. I traced the edges of the photos, memories flooding in like waves. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but instead, I felt a strange warmth. Not sadness, not anger, just acknowledgement of what was. Love isn't always meant to last forever. Sometimes it's just a chapter, not the whole book. I closed the album gently, like saying goodbye without words. And I was okay. One day, while at a coffee shop, I met someone new. His name was Ethan. It wasn't a grand, cinematic moment, just two people reaching for the same cup by mistake. We laughed, made small talk, and somehow, hours passed without me realizing. He was kind, easy to talk to, with eyes that didn't hold secrets. I didn't feel butterflies, not the intense, overwhelming kind I'd felt with Daniel. But maybe that was a good thing. Maybe love wasn't supposed to be a storm. Maybe it could be calm, like a gentle breeze that doesn't knock you over but makes you feel alive. I gave him my number, not because I needed him, but because I wanted to. Ethan and I started seeing each other casually. Coffee dates, long walks, conversations that flowed effortlessly. There was no pressure, no rush, just two people getting to know each other. With him, I didn't feel the need to be perfect. I could just be myself. Messy, complicated, healing. One evening, as we watched the sunset, he asked gently, "What happened before me?" I hesitated, then told him bits and pieces. Not the whole story, but enough. He listened without interrupting, without judgment, just quiet understanding. And that's when I realized, love isn't about finding someone to fill the empty spaces. It's about finding someone who appreciates the whole picture, even the cracks. Months passed, and life felt good. Not perfect, but beautifully imperfect. One morning, I woke up to find Daniel's name on my phone again. A message I hadn't expected. Just 3 words. "I miss you." I stared at it, not with longing, but with clarity. I didn't miss him, not the real him. I missed the idea of who I thought he was, the version I created in my mind. Without hesitation, I deleted the message. No anger, no sadness, just peace. Because letting go isn't about forgetting. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of what was. And I was finally free. Spring arrived, painting the world with colors I hadn't noticed before. Maybe they'd always been there, but now my heart was open enough to see them. Ethan and I grew closer, not in a whirlwind romance way, but something steady, like the gentle unfolding of petals. We laughed, shared quiet moments, and learned each other's quirks, like how he always forgot where he put his keys, or how I couldn't sleep without a cup of tea before bed. One evening, as we sat under the stars, he reached for my hand. His touch was warm, comforting, not the kind that made my heart race with anxiety, but the kind that made me feel safe. I smiled, realizing this was the beginning of something real. Not perfect, not flawless, but real. Just when I thought the past was behind me, I ran into Daniel again, at a bookstore, of all places. He looked different. Older? Sadder? Or maybe I just saw him with new eyes. "Anna," he said softly, as if my name was fragile. We exchanged small talk, nothing meaningful. But before we parted, he said, "I'm happy you're doing well." And surprisingly, I believed him. There was no bitterness in his voice, just acceptance. Walking away, I felt something unexpected, gratitude. Not for the pain, but for the lessons. Sometimes, closure isn't a conversation. It's a feeling. And I finally had it. Ethan was different from Daniel in every way, but scars have a way of whispering doubts. One evening, he was unusually quiet, distracted by his phone. My heart raced with old fears. Is he hiding something? But instead of spiraling, I asked, "Is everything okay?" He smiled sheepishly. "I've been planning a surprise for your birthday. I'm terrible at keeping secrets." Relief washed over me, followed by guilt. I realized how easy it was to let past wounds bleed into new relationships. But Ethan wasn't Daniel. He deserved trust, not shadows from someone else's mistakes. So, I let go of the fear and leaned into faith. My birthday arrived, and with it, Ethan's surprise. A weekend getaway to a cozy cabin by the lake. It was thoughtful, simple, and perfect. As we sat by the fire, he handed me a small box. Inside was a necklace with a delicate pendant, a tiny compass. "It's to remind you," he said softly, "that you'll always find your way, no matter what." Tears welled up, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming warmth in my heart. I realized then that while Ethan's love was beautiful, the greatest gift I'd given myself was learning to love me. Flaws, scars, all of it. I was enough. One sunny afternoon, I found the letter I'd written to Daniel months ago. I'd tucked it away, thinking it was unfinished. But reading it now, I realized it was complete. I didn't need to send it. I didn't need to revisit that chapter. So, I folded it one last time and burned it, watching the ashes drift away like whispers of a story I no longer needed to carry. Life isn't about erasing the past. It's about growing beyond it. As the smoke disappeared into the sky, I smiled, feeling lighter than ever. I was no longer defined by heartbreak. I was defined by how I healed. As seasons changed, so did my heart. Ethan and I grew closer, but part of me still held back, afraid to fall completely. One evening, we sat by the lake, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky blushed with streaks of orange and pink. Ethan turned to me, his eyes soft. "Anna, do you ever wonder what's next for us?" His question lingered in the air, heavy with possibilities. I took a deep breath. "I don't know, but I'd like to find out with you." Saying it felt like jumping off a cliff, but instead of falling, I found I could fly. Sometimes, love isn't about certainty. It's about choosing to believe. Even with happiness blooming, doubt occasionally crept in like shadows at dusk. What if I got hurt again? What if Ethan changed like Daniel did? One night, overwhelmed by fear, I distanced myself, canceling plans, avoiding calls. Ethan noticed. "Anna, are you okay?" he asked gently. I wanted to lie, to say I was fine, but honesty felt braver. "I'm scared," I whispered, "of trusting, of losing." He didn't try to fix it. He just held my hand. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." And in his quiet reassurance, I realized healing isn't linear. It's messy, imperfect, but it's real. After opening up to Ethan, something shifted. Not in him, in me. Vulnerability didn't feel like weakness anymore. It felt like freedom. We spent hours talking about everything. Our pasts, fears, dreams. No filters, no masks. Just raw, honest connection. One night, as we lay under a blanket of stars, Ethan whispered, "I love you, Anna." My heart raced, but not with fear. This time, it was different. I smiled, tears prickling my eyes. "I love you too." And in that moment, I wasn't afraid. Because real love doesn't demand perfection. It embraces the beautiful mess of who we are. Just when life felt steady, the past knocked again. This time with a phone call. It was Daniel. I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. Curiosity won. His voice was familiar yet distant. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I hope you're happy." There was no hidden agenda, no plea for another chance, just genuine remorse. I paused, then replied, "Thank you. I am happy." Hanging up, I felt a surprising wave of peace. Not because he apologized, but because I didn't need it to move on. Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about setting yourself free. That call from Daniel didn't shake me. It affirmed how far I'd come. Ethan and I planned a trip to the coast, a place I'd always dreamed of visiting but never had the courage to. Standing by the ocean, waves crashing against the shore, I felt a sense of calm I'd never known. Ethan wrapped his arms around me. "What are you thinking about?" I smiled. How beautiful life can be when you stop holding on to what's already gone. The past was a chapter, but I was living in a new one now, full of hope, love, and endless possibilities. I was finally home. The ocean breeze was cool against my skin, the salty air filled with possibility. Ethan and I walked along the shore, our footprints side by side, like quiet echoes of our journey. Suddenly, he stopped, pulling me gently toward him. His eyes held that familiar warmth, but there was something more, a spark of nervousness. "Anna," he began, his voice steady despite the waves crashing behind us, "loving you has been the easiest thing I've ever done. You've shown me what it means to be strong, vulnerable, and real. I can't imagine my life without you." Then, he dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled in my eyes, not from fear this time, but from overwhelming joy. "Yes," I whispered, my heart soaring. This was love, genuine, steady, and true. As we planned the wedding, I found myself reflecting on the woman I'd become. There was a time when I believed love was only passionate and consuming, like with Daniel. But love isn't just about grand gestures. It's about the quiet moments, sharing coffee, holding hands, feeling safe. I realized I didn't need Ethan to complete me. I was already whole. He simply added to my happiness. One night, while flipping through an old journal, I found an entry from the darkest days after Daniel's betrayal. Will I ever feel okay again? I smiled, closing the journal softly. The answer was yes. As the wedding day approached, an unexpected message arrived. Daniel again. I heard you're getting married. I just wanted to wish you happiness. I stared at the message, emotions swirling. But instead of feeling anxious, I felt gratitude. Without Daniel's betrayal, I might never have discovered my own strength or found Ethan. I typed a simple reply, "Thank you. I hope you find happiness too." No lingering questions, no what-ifs. Sometimes, closure isn't dramatic. It's just a quiet acceptance that the past shaped you, but it doesn't define you. And that was enough. The morning of our wedding was filled with soft sunlight and nervous excitement. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my dress, my reflection showing a woman who had survived heartbreak and found her way back to joy. As I walked down the aisle, I saw Ethan waiting, his eyes filled with love and warmth. Vows were exchanged, words woven with promises not just for perfect days, but for the messy, imperfect ones too. "I choose you," Ethan whispered, sliding the ring on my finger. Tears blurred my vision, but my heart was clear. This wasn't just a wedding. It was the start of a new chapter, one-eyed written with courage and hope. Married life with Ethan wasn't a fairy tale. It was better, real, raw, filled with laughter, small arguments, make-up hugs, and quiet Sunday mornings. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, he squeezed my hand. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. I looked at him, at the life we'd built together, and felt warmth spread through me. "I'm more than happy," I whispered. "I'm home." Because love isn't about perfection. It's about finding someone who feels like peace after the storm. And in Ethan's arms, I'd found exactly that. Life after the wedding felt like a gentle breeze, calm, comforting, and beautifully ordinary. Ethan and I settled into routines that felt like rituals. Morning coffee on the porch, spontaneous dance parties in the kitchen, late-night talks about everything and nothing. But even in happiness, life has its surprises. One morning, I felt off, nausea, exhaustion, a lingering sense of something shifting. I brushed it off as stress, but deep down, a thought flickered. A pregnancy test later, I stood in the bathroom, heart racing, 2 pink lines. I stared, overwhelmed by emotions, fear, excitement, disbelief. When I told Ethan, his face lit up with joy. He wrapped me in his arms, whispering, "We're going to be okay. We've got this." And I believed him. Pregnancy brought its own set of challenges, not just the physical changes, but emotional ones too. I worried, would I be a good mother? Could I protect this little life growing inside me from the heartbreaks I'd faced? One night, I woke from a dream about Daniel, his betrayal replaying like an old film. The fear lingered even after I woke. Ethan noticed. "What's wrong?" I hesitated, then whispered, "What if I'm not enough? What if I mess this up?" He cupped my face gently. "Anna, you've survived the worst and still found love. That's strength. You'll be an amazing mother." And somehow, his words stitched up the cracks I didn't know were still there. As my belly grew, so did my heart. Feeling the baby kick for the first time was like discovering a new kind of magic, tiny flutters that reminded me of the life we'd created. Ethan was my anchor through it all, attending appointments, talking to my belly, painting the nursery a soft, calming shade of green. But it wasn't just the baby growing. It was me. I was becoming someone new, stronger, more patient, more hopeful. One quiet evening, Ethan placed his hand on my belly, feeling a strong kick. His eyes sparkled with wonder. "That's our little miracle," he whispered. And for the first time, I believed I deserved this happiness. Labor was intense, painful, raw, overwhelming. But Ethan never left my side, holding my hand, whispering encouragement. When I finally heard our baby's first cry, tears streamed down my face. They placed a tiny, perfect human in my arms, and time stood still. A little girl. I looked at her, overwhelmed by love so fierce it took my breath away. We named her Hope, because that's what she was, a reminder that even after the darkest storms, light finds its way through. Holding her, I realized life isn't about avoiding heartbreak. It's about surviving, healing, and daring to love again. Motherhood was messy, beautiful chaos. Sleepless nights, endless diapers, and moments so tender they made me cry. One day, as I rocked Hope to sleep, I thought about the woman I used to be, broken, afraid, unsure if I'd ever feel whole again. But here I was, cradling not just a child, but the life I'd rebuilt piece by piece. Ethan walked in, smiling softly. He kissed my forehead and whispered, "I love our life." I looked at him, at our daughter, at the home we'd created, and I realized this wasn't just my story of heartbreak. It was my story of healing, of finding love again, not just with Ethan, but with myself. And it was beautiful. Parenthood was nothing like I'd imagined. Some days, it was magical. Hope's giggles filling the house, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine. Other days, it was overwhelming. Sleepless nights, endless crying, doubts creeping in like shadows. But through it all, Ethan was my partner, my safe place. One evening, after a particularly hard day, I broke down. "I feel like I'm failing," I whispered, tears spilling over. Ethan pulled me close. "Anna, love isn't about getting everything right. It's about showing up, even when it's hard. And you do that every single day." His words wrapped around me like a warm blanket. I realized life doesn't have to be perfect to be beautiful. It just has to be real. Months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm. Then, one afternoon, as I was rocking Hope to sleep, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, my heart skipped a beat. Daniel stood there, older, more worn, a nervous smile on his face. "I'm sorry to show up like this," he said softly. "I was in town and I just wanted to see you, to say I'm truly sorry." My heart raced, but not with fear, just surprise. I glanced at Hope, sleeping peacefully in my arms. "I appreciate that," I replied quietly. And that was it. No drama, no tears, just closure. After Daniel's visit, I expected to feel shaken, but I wasn't. Instead, I felt free. I sat with Ethan that evening, telling him about the encounter. He listened without jealousy, without judgment, just understanding. "Do you regret any of it?" he asked gently. I thought about it, then shook my head. No, because every choice, every heartbreak, led me here. To you. To Hope. Sometimes, life doesn't erase the scars. It helps you wear them proudly. Daniel was part of my story, but he wasn't my ending. I'd written new chapters filled with love, growth, and peace. And I was exactly where I was meant to be. Years passed in a series of little moments. Hope's first steps, her first words, Ethan's laugh filling the kitchen, quiet nights under the stars. It wasn't grand gestures that defined our love. It was the way Ethan always made my tea just right. The way Hope's sleepy voice called me Mama in the dark. The way our home smelled like fresh laundry and Sunday pancakes. One night, I tucked Hope into bed and sat beside her, stroking her hair. She looked up at me with sleepy eyes. "Mama, are you happy?" I smiled, my heart full. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm the happiest I've ever been." And I meant it. One rainy afternoon, while Hope napped, I found an old journal tucked away in a drawer. I flipped through its pages, scribbled fears, heartbreak, doubts. I decided to write a letter to the woman I used to be. "Dear Anna, I know you're hurting. You feel lost, broken. But I promise you, this isn't the end. Your heart will heal, even when it feels impossible. You'll find love again, not just in someone else, but in yourself. You'll build a life filled with laughter, warmth, and a little girl who calls you Mama. Hold on. The best is yet to come." I closed the journal, tears in my eyes but a smile on my lips. Because every chapter, every heartbreak, every joy, had led me here. Home. As Hope grew, I saw reflections of myself in her. Her stubborn streak, her curious mind, her big heart. One day, she came home from school upset. "I made a mistake, Mama. I feel like a failure." Her words hit me like a wave, echoing my own past insecurities. I knelt beside her, brushing a tear from her cheek. Sweetheart, mistakes don't define us. They teach us. They help us grow. I've made so many mistakes, but they led me to the life I have now, and to you. Her small arms wrapped around me, and I realized how far I'd come, not just in healing from heartbreak, but in becoming the kind of woman and mother I'd always hoped to be. Ethan and I celebrated our wedding anniversary with a quiet evening at home. Hope helped set the table, proudly placing candles she'd made at school. After dinner, Ethan took my hand, his eyes filled with that familiar warmth. You know, I still remember the first time I saw you. I thought, there's something special about her. I laughed softly, and I thought, I hope he's not like the last guy. We both chuckled, the kind of laughter born from years of shared memories. But then he grew serious. Thank you for choosing me, Anna. For trusting me with your heart. I squeezed his hand. Thank you for holding it so gently. One crisp autumn morning, we took a family walk through the park. Hope ran ahead, her laughter echoing through the trees. Ethan and I strolled behind, watching her. Can you believe how fast she's growing? I whispered. He nodded. It feels like yesterday we brought her home. I thought about the past, the heartbreak, the healing, the unexpected twists that led me here. And I realized something. Life doesn't follow the script we write in our heads. It surprises us, challenges us, but it also blesses us in ways we never imagined. I squeezed Ethan's hand, my heart full. The future was unwritten, but for the first time, that felt exciting, not scary. Hope had a school project, family history. She asked me about my past, and for the first time, I told her the story. Not just the pretty parts, but the hard ones too. She listened intently, her eyes wide. Were you scared, Mama? I smiled gently. Yes, but being scared didn't stop me. It made me braver. When she presented her project, she ended with, My mama taught me that even when life is hard, you can still find happiness. You just have to believe in it. I blinked back tears, my heart bursting with pride. She wasn't just my daughter. She was my greatest lesson and my greatest gift. Years later, as I sat on the porch with Ethan, watching the sunset, I reflected on everything. The heartbreak that shattered me, the love that healed me, the daughter who transformed me. If I could go back and change anything, I wouldn't. Every tear, every mistake, every wrong turn, it all led me here. Ethan took my hand, his grip as steady as ever. You know, I whispered, if someone had told me back then that I'd end up this happy, I wouldn't have believed them. He smiled. That's the thing about life. The best parts are often the ones you never saw coming. And with that, I knew. This was the happily ever after I'd earned. Not perfect, but perfectly mine.